He has his own.
A completely mental crush. It's a completely mental crush.
Perfect.
So.
I like your greenery in the background. I haven't seen that sort of setup before. It's so green back there. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, our springtime is like full on. Like this whole weekend I've been cutting the yard. It's just been like my all everything to trim the yard is pretty much broken down now. I killed it. I killed it all. So
Right
it's
on.
all good.
Awesome.
So Miss Emily, welcome to the BioCharisma live stream.
I'm so happy to be here with you, my friend. You always you're one of those people out there that just always makes me feel really good about myself. You seem, whenever we chat, you just seem so excited to chat with me and that you like me just the way I am. And that's not something that I always experienced in my life. And it feels nice coming from you. So I'm always happy to spend a minute, an hour, or a day with you, my friend. Let's rock it.
I've always vibed with you. I mean, let me tell you this. Like, I was listening to a couple of Mike Winter sets on SoundCloud.
Mm-hmm.
And then I told SoundCloud I really like DJ Icy, so they threw on a DJ Icy set. And dude, it was so grimy. I got so much work done. I was just like, what? Like, oh my goodness. Like, and I've always vibed with you with that. Like there's just something with like when the tunes are right, you just go. Like it just happens. So that's all. You've always I first heard you way back in the day with Randy Moggins and all that stuff, and you would every once in a while you throw in your like little EDM dance scene rave thing going on. I was like, I gotta meet this Emily. I know it.
Well, I'm glad we finally met. I know, like, Michael Joseph tried to arrange that connection many years back, and it took a few years before it ever came to fruition, but all in divine timing. I'm glad it did. I love dance music. I love chatting with people who also love it. DJ Icy is one of those phenomenons that I kind of like wonder what ever happened to, right? Like when I came into the rave scene, like he was big time. And I don't know, sometimes it's hard to tell if you just move on to other things. And so that's kind of like it's kind of like your feed on YouTube. Like you sort of change what you're into. So it seems like the other person disappeared, but they're still there. It's just you're in different realities. Or if he went underground, because he's not a name that that gets brought up really very much anymore, other than from you to me. So, but he definitely had some hot minutes there in the late 90s and into the early 2000s, right? Like I remember the first time I heard that this is how my drummer drums, that like the radio kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I would love to hear some sets that you recommend, because now that I'm like getting back into it and exercising again and doing like now that my body is like coming back into fold, like I just I just need the music. If I get the music, I'm just gonna go.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited about that. I really want to talk to you about the Sonic Hypercube.
Yep.
Because I re-listened to, since you sent it to me last week, I listened to it and I've been watching the show that you recommended, Dark. And so for those of you out there, in both instances, what we're essentially, there's this thing that occurs with hyperdimensionality, and essentially I guess it was the last pod that we did together. How about you set the scene? How about you describe to people what the scene was, and specifically the geometries that you were exposed to, and then we'll get into all the weirdness of what was actually being experienced for you within that setting.
So, okay. So I've been to thousands of parties in my life. I go to many fewer now than I used to, partly just because of responsibilities and dependent on like location, right? Like there's just not as many opportunities for what I'm into where I live now than there was when I lived in Los Angeles. So mostly I go when I go home to visit Los Angeles.
Right.
But as you know, in the beginning, I was just going to parties like everyone else, having a good time, dancing to the tunes. At the time, I was a break dancer, so that's like a scene within the scene, right? So that, like, sometimes eating drugs, sometimes not, like, just I was there for the party. And like occasionally I would have one of those experiences, particularly like when I got into acid, where like I recognized that there was like multiple layers of things going on, not just, oh, we're at the party, we're having fun, everyone's in a cohesive vibe, and like it's fun to watch dancers or have people clap when you're dancing in the circle or whatever it was. So I started paying attention to that. And over time, the amount of attention I was paying to the other layers that weren't so obvious increased, in the amount of time I was worried about whether people were clapping when I did a flip in the circle and like what that kind of stuff. I became less interested in that, right? And as that happened, I became much more interested in the sound and lighting that was going on at the parties, as opposed to just the social scene and which DJ was playing. Though those things still have something to do with it, right? And over the last number of years, I've become very, very clear, right, that I've become very clear that the sound systems are providing the opportunity for a variety of kind of experiences. Some of which are sort of being like, okay, we're just sort of providing this opportunity, you take it and run with it wherever you're going. And other times the experience feels like much more directed. Now, with that said, like if you're not paying attention to it, it's still just, oh, you're having fun at the party. You're not recognizing, you might think there's a weird vibe or a good vibe or whatever it is. But you know, there's this other situation going on, and that a lot of times the quality of the experience had to do with what sound system and what lighting system, what style of lighting or what type of visual show was happening. And when I say that, like different sound systems can both be good, but they can be achieving a quality of sound in different ways. And I started to recognize that the experience that I had with this system as opposed to this system differed in sort of like quality or tone or certain types of like thought patterns or different things that were going on, right? So the specific party that we're talking about, like that you and I talked about, this was a function 1 sound system, and right, and it was arranged sort of, you know, it's arranged where there's like some sound up at the front of the room and then a little bit more sound sort of at the middle of the room, near the area where the booth is set up that the visuals are being projected from. And then in this case, there was also visuals at the front of the room on the screen. And then there were slitted screens along the side of the room as well. And the overall effect created sort of an implied hexagon, an implied like truncated hexagonal prism, or some sort of like sonic hypercube type of middle of the dance floor. You could step outside of that and you'd still be experiencing good sound and good music and interesting things to look at, but it felt different. It felt like there was sort of a semi-permeable membrane being constructed around a specific sort of portion of the dance floor that was creating an effect within it that was sort of like a double slit or Schrodinger's cat kind of experience, right? Where you kind of, you know, at least for me, I don't interview all of the other people at the party on the way out, though maybe I should sometime, to see like what's going on for them. I have a few friends that I chat with, and like most of them don't see it the way I see it, unless I point it out to them. And then some of them, once I point out what's going on to them, they go, okay, now I can see it. Kind of like the game you used to play when you were a kid with the clouds, where you like, oh, that cloud looks like a bunny rabbit. And, you know, your friend is like, no, I don't see that one. I see this one over there that looks like a dog. But you're like, oh, come over here. And then you show where you're looking at it and how, and then they work at it and then they can see. You know, and then there's other friends of mine that are like, Emily's a fucking crackpot and she's cuckoo, but she's funny and smart. So we leave her, you know, we let her hang out or whatever it is. And I don't care about that either. That's fine for me. I don't understand though how all of these kooky experiences can make me think of something. And then when I go home and begin deep research on that thing, it confirms the experience that I just had. I can't be that much of a crackpot. Like, maybe it's good to be a crackpot, so you consider the idea. But I don't think I would be finding like a lot of confirmatory type of information from a variety of different fields if like the epiphany I was grabbing wasn't valid.
Right. I think it's very valid. You know, this weekend I was meeting with clients and I was going, oops, I got hit mute. So I was going with clients. I was actually describing to them, I was showing them their actual structures in 3D mapping. And when it comes to actually creating anything of material, you and I are, I think, in the same place where the material world is essentially just slowed down music. It's music with inertia. So what was so incredible about our conversation was you were talking about the side walls that were making, essentially taking a cube that you were in and making it into a hexagon, and you were talking about the different materials that were made. Is very similar to when I'm drawing a 3D structure and mapping a 3D structure and showing a client. A lot of times I have to show them the substructure. Like the substructure is what allows the regular structure to be there. So when you were saying, when you went into the middle of the dance floor, you had a completely different experience. That makes so much sense to me because I've built buildings where the sound will all reflect and concress. There's a thing called concrescence in one zone, right? And sometimes we have to cancel the concrescence and sometimes we have to amplify it depending on what the client wants. And these speakers, I mean, on one of your podcasts, we went through and showed the different, like, you know, function one speakers. What was the other speaker company that?
So the other one that like, so there's a lot of sound systems that are hybrids, but like since I've been really closely observing like the specifics of the experience, like trying to create like a set of parameters to understand the experience, the two sound systems I've been sort of comparing, contrasting are the Function One sound system and then Danley Labs sound system. And they achieve sound completely opposite. Like, right, one is almost like creating a void, and the other is like sort of forcing something through. Right. If I showed you the speakers, they're almost exactly opposite. The way, like the interior of the speaker looks opposite. It doesn't just look different; it looks opposite.
I noticed that back in the day. I forget what series from Bose, but they did a reverse speaker. And the way you would have that speaker set up in your rooms, because I actually set up audio video for when I first got out of college. I was so into setting up my own audio video. I had all these other people hiring me to do that for them because I was like a techie in that way. And these Bose speakers, they were a strictly reflecting type of speaker. So you actually had to place it so that you had to place it in the corner of a room so that it would actually fill the entire room, the reflection of the speaker. And they reversed everything, the tweeter, the drivers, the subwoofers, they were all in reverse. So it was more of like that pulling aspect. And you and I have talked before about implosion, because have you ever heard anything implode, by the way, that you know of?
I don't know. I mean, like I would think, I don't, it's possible that I have, but it's possible at the time I thought I was hearing something implode that I didn't exactly understand what an implosion was at that time. So like in my memory, it's recorded as I heard something implode, but the thing wasn't actually an implosion. So I can't say for sure.
So implosion is very odd because it sucks your eardrum out. So normally, like, people don't even understand what sound is. Sound isn't an actual wave of something hitting you. It's the medium that you're in. The medium that you're in is vibrating, and it's putting pressure on your whole body, but it's transduced into sound in your eardrums, the tympanic membranes and other aspects of the inner ear. will convert that to a signal that you hear as auditory. An implosion, instead of pushing that tympanic membrane in,
Okay.
an implosion pulls it out. So it's a very odd type of loud.
Okay.
It's like a completely different. It's the best way I could say, like, if you've ever heard like a firecracker go off right next to you and you kind of like shriek and you go down, like you go into a protect mode, or lightning strikes near you, which happened to me today. like kind of like brace like this. With an implosion, it's almost like you jump up. Like every time, because when you light orgone gas, like, or
Yep.
when you light hydrogen protium, it will implode. I did this, and it's such an interesting sensation. And the reason why I bring this up is because in this hyperdimensional, sonic hypercube that we're talking about, this experimental stage or dance floor, I really think that the experimentation was that all the to this, how big would you say that center part was where you could feel completely different? Like, what would you say?
Like, so about, like, if I was to maybe 30 by 30, maybe a little smaller.
Oh, it was that big.
Maybe smaller, maybe like, let's see. Yeah, like somewhere between 20 by 20 and 30 by 30.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize it was so big. Now, I want you to tell the crowd, like, what was there were some really interesting effects of what you were witnessing, how other people looked.
Mm-hmm.
Like the nonlinear time thing with appearances and all that. Was that only when you were in that central space?
So I would say that I noticed it in the central space, and then from there I could follow it outside of the space, right?
Mhm.
But like when I first noticed it, and whenever I kind of started to have this weird collection of ideas, it was always in the space, right?
Mhm.
And then when I would go out of the space I already had in my head, I could observe them. If those people were outside of that, so I could observe that, but the ideas were not occurring to me outside of that space. I could only
Mhm.
follow them outside of the space, right?
Right.
And so there was a couple of different things. Like, first of all, like I did, like early on in the evening, begin to experience this feeling where it felt like, and this kind of tracks back to the previous conversation we had about a different party, where I told you I felt like I was watching, like, how one would, like, how DNA was like sort of a light language that was being written by vibration. Remember that
Yes.
conversation? Okay, so there was a point where I could feel with the oscillation of the music that it almost felt like our genetic codes were sort of being oscillated to a place where they were sharing information with each other, like on the dance floor, right? Like there's, in the Los Angeles techno scene, there's like a lot of Latino people, a lot of Asian people, and good amount of white people. But it was it was weird for like a moment. Like, people would start to look like they were kind of taking on sort of characteristics of each other. And I recognized, like, when I looked around, I recognized how many people there like almost looked like they could be related to each other in a way that, like, I hadn't really noticed before. And in hindsight, I can see it, that it was sort of always there, but there was something about the way it was all sort of oscillating that created this eye-opening way of looking at the thing to me and seeing some connections I didn't see. So there was that. But the strange, there's two like highly anomalous things that I was like entertained. Well, maybe three. So the first thing was I started to recognize that, like, a large portion of the people at the party were wearing things from my closet. Right. And by that, I don't mean that, like,
Were you mandala affected? Like, was this like,
so
was Brian Stabley on you?
But I've actually never spoken to Brian Stabley, and I've listened to little tiny bits here and there. I didn't, so I don't know that the clothes in my closet thing is part of his Mandela effects, but what I mean by that is I don't mean that, like, somehow secretly while I was at the party, everybody raided my closet and came in my clothes. But what I meant is that, like, a lot of the people, I'm one of those people, I keep clothes for a really long time because I don't generally like the current fashions. Yeah, I don't generally like current fashions. So if I find something I like to wear, I stretch it out as long as I can. But what I found is that there was people there like wearing previous uniforms of mine, like things that I used to wear that are still like in my closet. Like maybe I don't wear them anymore or whatever it is. But it was like a lot of people where they had like put their outfits together from like a similar stock as of mine, which, okay, if you were dealing with like a bunch of short, petite girls who like the same things as I do and are of about the same age, that would make sense. But we're talking about tall people, short people, young people, older people, different, you know, looks, different styles. Like they had all sort of grab bagged things from my sort of my wardrobe. Or on the other side, if they weren't wearing something that was a piece of clothing that I owned, whatever was on the clothing that they were wearing was like referring somehow to something that like I had talked about in a show that week or that month, or that was correlated to exactly where my mind was at. And it had nothing to do with the music we were there to hear. Right.
Dude, this sounds like you were in like Michael Douglas's The Game movie. You ever see the movie The Game?
So I think we started watching it, but we didn't finish. I have to get back to it, but I do know what you're talking. I know enough about it that I know what you're talking about. Okay. So there was that. So there was that. And then I started to like look at some of that, like I looked at this one outfit, and this person was literally wearing the exact same thing that I was wearing, but I was wearing black Vans and they were wearing black Converse. But what was funny is Laura was home in Los Angeles with me, and I have a pair of black Converse that are there that I didn't bring to Austin with me. And that day I took them out and I tried them on because I was thinking about wearing them to the party instead. And like, I've never done that there before, right? It was like an anomaly that I took out this old pair of shoes that I used to wear to parties and put them on. And I thought about wearing them, but then I didn't. So then you have a person standing next to me that is wearing exactly the same everything as me. Hair almost looks the same and everything. And the only difference is the shoes that I decided not to wear and left, you know, kind of by my bed at home. So like I was noticing some of these things. And then at a certain point, I started to look around, and there was people there that looked like previous iterations of me. So they were wearing clothes that I used to wear, but they also had like the same hairdo going that maybe I had in 2005, 2011, 2013, or whatever it is. And some of them were men and some of them were women, right? And I've had periods in my life where like I felt more in touch with my masculine side, and other periods where I felt more in touch with my feminine side. And usually I'm kind of somewhere sort of in the middle. But like I was looking at these people who were dressed like me in particular periods of time, and I was watching their body language and kind of observing them and noticing that like I could see the same issues surrounding how you feel about yourself or whatever was going on with me in that time, like on them, right? There was this one couple, and these were the two that I was like the most sort of humored by. That the girl looked like me in my most feminine, and the guy looked like me sort of in my most masculine, right? And they were both wearing outfits that I used to wear, right? And they were dancing in the circle, which is something I used to do, right? And I was kind of amused by this. Like I was watching them like I was intrigued with their dancing, but I was like intrigued with the whole thing. And it's not that I have never seen anything like this at parties before, but I would usually experience one of these anomalies. And what I mean one sort of criteria thing and then one instance of it, right? I might see one person, I'm like, wow, that person like looks like my clone, looks like they're wearing the outfit I wore yesterday, but it would be one and I would be incredibly bothered by it. This was like many, like there was like an endless supply of iterations of Emily, and I was very humored by it. Like I was amused by it. And I like in a way that I had not been with any of those before. And it was a lot of them. But at one point, towards the end of the party, when some of this had settled down and there weren't quite as many Emilys around anymore, I observed the male of the couple teaching himself on the ground to do a breakdancing move that I used to do. Like I had this unusual move that I did that like people would be like, oh, can you do that move kind of thing, right? And he was teaching himself how to do it. And this girl walks over to him And this girl looks like another girl that I used to be friends with. Well, I still see her at parties here sometimes. Her name is Emily also, but we don't really look alike, right? But her name is Emily, spelled with an I-E at the end. This girl who looks like this Emily walks over and says the same thing to him that she had said to me on the floor of the Austin City Music Hall 20 years ago, or 20 plus years ago. Right. And gets into a conversation with him about this move he's trying to teach himself. And I'm just seeing him like, one of the things that I always loved at parties was like when most of the people had left and there was just the real hardcorers left, like between like 5 and 6 in the morning kind of thing. There's more room to dance. And that's when I would like spread out and really like try something new or experiment with new moves, because there was plenty of room and not many people around to laugh at you if you ate shit. And he was doing like exactly what I used to do. Right. And this was just kind of fascinating for me to watch. And I kind of, there was this interesting for myself that was different than what some of those times in my life were really hard for me. Like, even though I was going to parties and having a good time, I was on, I struggled for a long time in my life. I still struggle sometimes in ways that people probably wouldn't expect. And so I was kind of getting a view of myself that I sort of never had before. And that was kind of interesting. But I noticed as the evening went on, there was less and less people at the party and less of these people sort of that looked like me. And like, I started to kind of think at a certain point that like whatever was being created here, this hypercube, smushed many dimensions together within it. Like all these different, like every Emily, maybe not every, but many Emilys that exist in many different either timelines or dimensions, they all like the same things as me, or at least similar, because we're mostly the same. And many of them probably would have come to a party tonight in downtown LA in their timeline or their dimension. And somehow whatever was going on here this night, whether it be because of location or because of what was happening as the effect of the sound, we got compressed in this space, right? And I started to wonder, like, are we all leaving to the same dimension from, or the same timeline that we came from, right? Like that started to become part of the question for myself.
This was on your solar opposition, right? It was like halfway between birthdays.
I think that's what you said. Like I think we were there. Yeah, I think that was. It was Thanksgiving time.
Is that your solar opposition?
So my the date that they claim I came out of my mother's stomach in Los Angeles in 1975 was June 29th, right? And so this was like I think this was November 28th or 29th that the party was. Okay,
so it's like 7 months.
5 months or 6 months, 5 months, 5 months or something. But and then you and I took a look at the flyer for the party, and we talked about some of the other things that are going on, and I had this other scenario that happened sort of at the beginning of the party and at the end of the party that left me hanging with the question of whether or not I left to the same reality that I arrived from, right? And that was that when I arrived there, right? Like I was there for maybe an hour. I always like to feel the party out before I decide if I'm going to commit on another level, if you know what I mean. Right. Yes. But I decided I was going to commit. And so I took the goodies out of the bag. Right. And I ate them, and I had this bag in my hand. And I remember trying to decide if I was going to put it back in my pocket or if I was going to throw it away. Right. And I decided to throw it away. So I ate the goodies and I walk over to the garbage can, which is outside of the hexagon, right? Outside of the hexagon. I walk over, and I wasn't clear on the hexagon at this point. Like the hexagon became clear to me later, but I walked over to the garbage can, which is on the side of the room, and I put the bag in the trash can. Like I didn't toss it. Like I put it in there. And I know I did because I also noticed there was a lot of garbage around the garbage can, and I picked up a few cans and put them in because I don't like to have stuff all over the dance floor, right? So when the party was just about at the end, right, I was standing towards the back of where the hexagon or the hypercube or whatever we're talking about this is. And I looked down on the ground, and the bag, and it was an unusual bag. It wasn't like just your standard regular Ziploc bag. There was something on the bag that made it different than other bags. The bag was on the floor, right where I had been standing when I ate the goodies 5 hours prior. right? And so I look down, and the bag is on a mark on the ground that is like, it looks like there's a couple of things that I've looked at since having been to the party. Like, it looks a little bit like the if you look into Occult Chemistry by Annie Ledbetter, I think it's Charles Ledbetter and Annie Besant, the ways that they draw the sort of remote viewing of the different elements, it looks like some of the particles from that. And then there was also something else that we were looking into that I can't quite remember right now, that had like a graph of something that looked like this drawing that was on the floor. But the bag was right on top of this mark on the floor. And it's almost like the mark on the floor was kind of right in the middle. It was like a few feet away from like a post or a beam that was like part of the, you know, down into the floor from the ceiling. And it was kind of at almost the exact center of the hexagon. It was kind of right. It was pretty, like, it looked like it could have been a mark, like this is where we sort of arrange sort of everything around. But the bag that I know I threw away earlier was there. So I go to my friend who was at the party, who is able to imagine some of the things that I talk about, right? She listens to like all of our stuff and whatever. And I'm like, I tell her what happened. And I'm like, what do we do? I'm like, do I pick the bag up and throw it away, or do we leave it there? And she's like, leave it there, right? So she was with me at the party when this was going on. So how is it that does that mean that by the time the party was settled down, the phenomena had stopped? I was kind of like getting ready to go when this happened, right? Like, was the layer of the cake that I ended up in the same layer that I came in from, right?
No,
I don't think so either.
No.
And I had lots of things happen in the days and weeks after that told me that while I was in a close enough reality that like we all still recognize each other and have 99.999% of similarity in common, there was a few specific differences that I knew I was in. I was in something.
So this is a big thing, you know, because you and I have talked a lot about the mandala effect, or Mandela effect, however you want to say it.
I think Mandela effect is a better term for it.
Yeah, I like to say mandala because getting it, we're talking about geometry of, you know, we're talking about geometry of compression waves. I mean, that's what reality is. It's a geometry of compression waves. You know, the medium that we're in is constantly, you know, it's essentially oscillating, and how it oscillates is what our experience is within it. So, and how we oscillate, you know, you could say that's how you dance. You can put yourself, you know, you can entrain yourself into a certain thread, and you can just get in it, and then dimensions change, right? I think you and I really connected over the OA. My wife is secretly the biggest fan of the OA ever. And for those of you who haven't seen the OA, they essentially do these like dance moves to actually create a portal for time jumps at the end of the show. And it's really awesome. Like, it might sound quirky, but there is something about embodying a specific wave pattern, and, you know, moving something through the physical body, because we're here, we're in the physical body. So, you know, our soul can flitter about in the astral realms all at once, but there's a reason why we take on a physical body to actually create other compression waves that affect our environment. So here you're in the cut, you're dancing, you're your own geometry, and then you're seeing your geometry that's been expressed in different times with a slight variation. You have a full experience of how many of our hours, and then you come out, and then now you're in a different dimensional pattern. I mean, what's the old Taoist saying? You can never step in the same stream twice.
Right.
That is so true. And I think for the most, like, I notice subtle differences all the time. I had a moment, I think I was like, God, I was in morning daycare. So I must have been 10 or 11 years old. We were driving out, and I knew the direction that we were going. There was a highway to drive out to pick up kids. I was on the school bus. I dropped my little Matchbox car. I went down to go pick it up. And when I came up, I was like, it was the directions were reversed to me.
Yep.
Like my whole universe did 180 degrees. And I got extremely upset because the driver, she's like, no, we're going out to Bonaventure. This is where we always go. And I was so distraught because it was literally the
The
opposite of
wrong
what I
way.
knew.
Yep.
And it never changed back.
Yep.
Like prior to age 10 to like, the next 38 years is I still feel that way. And I have a dyslexia too with numbers. So I have to be very, very quick to go ahead and reverse numbers from how I see them. I will want to say them one way and I reverse it and it will be correct. And it's this weird way of like it's just an interpretation of, whatever the compression waves that are coming.
Yep.
That is a little bit skewed, right?
Yep.
And I find like really great athletes. For those of you out there that don't know, Emily was a scholarship gymnast. I know this like with really great athletes or people that have I call it proprioception. Like they just have the capacity to know their body in space and time. We're weird. Like we kind of interpret our surroundings. There's like an extra sensory thing going on that if there's just the slightest little variation,
Yeah,
it's picked up. It's like there's a feeling going on somewhere within the body mind organism that's just like, hey, this is different. And I'm always telling people everything's always different. Like to say this is like a concrete reality is just kind of I don't know. That's just not my experience. I find that everything is pretty much in flux. I mean, not everything. That's a little bit dramatic to say, but there is a very large component of change that is always going on, especially in an environment like you're talking about, where sonically you're being bombarded by very advanced speakers that, who knows what's in the inaudible range. You're aware of the audible range, but with those types of speakers and the type of compression wave that they can send at you, who knows what your body, like the actual your physical organism picks up. Because now science is admitting that our skin, every single one on our epidermis, our skin cells, they all have light receptors.
yes.
I've known this my entire life because, people say, oh, just put on a mask. If I was like going traveling and being exposed to false light, I was like, no, I can feel the light. Like I can feel it. Like my skin feels it. Like my skin reads it as daytime. So I could cover my eyes and it doesn't matter. I can feel the agitation of the light. And so who's to say sonically what's happening, like, with when that compression wave is hitting you, what the actual dimension it was actually putting you in. And then, because was it this particular scene that you were at that had the really incredible lighting also, or was that the prior one that you told me about?
So it was a completely different kind of light experience than the previous one. So before we talk about that, I want to just comment on a few things you said that came up. Okay. And then lighting experiences. We'll get back to that. So what you said about the directional thing that from the time that you were a kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know the best way I've had experiences like that, and the best way I can explain it to people who haven't had it is if you've ever been to New York City and it was your first time visiting there, and like you're taking the subway and you're getting out like near where your hotel is, and then because you're not paying attention, you're talking to someone, you accidentally come out of the subway station on the opposite side from where you thought you were going to come out, and it looks like you're in a place that you were before but reverse. It's very disorienting and it's disturbing. It's like, wow, this is weird that there's another place that looks almost exactly like where I came from, but it's backwards, right? That's like one of those disorienting experiences that tourists or people who first moved to New York have, and it can be upsetting. But I used to have these experiences when I was a kid where I would like find some little store I liked that sold some like Hello Kitty or some fucking candy or some shit that I liked. And then when I would want to go back there, my parents wouldn't know what I was talking about. And I would go on and on and on about this place or that place or this hotel we stayed at, that whatever. And like my parents, like, what the fuck are you talking about? Right. Mm-hmm. And I even had it as an adult where like, I remember like when I early moved to Austin, I went into some store and I bought something. And like a few weeks later, I tried to go back to that store and like, it wasn't there and no one knew what I was talking about. And everyone was like, whatever. Right. So like you had an experience of this when you were a kid, that somehow you had shifted frequency by going upside down when the car was in motion or whatever, like maybe that you, mm-hmm. there was a bump. Right. And so it was immediate. Whereas like the kinds that I'm talking about, like, okay, maybe it happened, in between, like a week in between while I was sleeping. And so I didn't notice the moment it happened, but I shifted just in the same way you did. So that almost everything that was there, but like in a different sort of order or not exactly in the same place. And so when I went to the place, it wasn't there. And this is one of these, I am still pursuing some of these mysteries from when I was a kid. And then more I get added on as an adult, but I am still like, I will be someplace and I'm like, oh my God, this feels like the place that I've been looking for since I was 6. And I start like trying to figure it out. Right. That's how much of a mark it left on me. So I wanted to bring that up. And then I also, what you brought up about to get everything right on the record. I was actually a walk-on gymnast. I wasn't a scholarship. I hurt myself the year that you're sort of getting, all that stuff is going on. But I did compete in NC2A Division I gymnastics. And I did gymnastics from the time that I was 2 until I was 20 plus. So what you're talking, you find sort of, it's imagine like, you're looking to sort of create something to spin around on in space and time. Like you're looking for like a point, like an access point or like a fulcrum to sort of grab onto, to throw. It's imaginary or it's there, but not visible, to sort of like, arrange your body around in space and time. And if your way of sort of doing that, and especially in gymnastics where you're using equipment and you're, having to time things in specific ways, if that you're looking at that to orient yourself. And if that feels off, it is not just like, disorienting and you might miss your trick or fall or whatever. It's upsetting, right? Because it's literally like what you're relying on for the sort of creation of your reality, right? And so when the thing happened in Tokyo with Simone Biles, where she pulled out of the competition because she got lost in the air, like we're talking about probably the most kinesthetically aware human being on earth. She was lost. I could tell. And she could not continue. So there's a million things going on attached to it, aside it. Michael and I dove into it that day that it happened. There was all kinds of crazy stuff that like one could have seen this coming. I actually think she found herself inside of a created hypercube, but she didn't have this sort of physics or metaphysics or understanding of alternative reality that we have to have any idea about what was going on for herself. It was just like, shit, I can't find my spin zone. Like I can't do it the way I normally do it. And this is dangerous. And she had to stop. Like she could not keep going or she would have had a disaster. So the way you described that was correct. And then also you said something about the OA moves, right? The OA moves, I don't know if you know Chris and Hunter from the Melt, but like Hunter was in the Carlos Castaneda cult where he taught them magical passes, which were like dance things to do exactly what they're doing. And she met Britt Marling, the girl who wrote OA a couple of years before OA. And she told Britt Marling about those dance moves. And that she says that that's kind of where Britt Marling sort of got that idea, was from that conversation, which I think is interesting. But yeah, it's they were doing, I've had experiences, like I think I told you about from that prior party, which we'll get to in just a minute. Like I had a moment at that party where like I did this sort of dance move that people love when I do. And like all of this activity started occurring around me the moment I did it, almost like there was a crew of people that were there waiting for and hoping I would do that move. And then I did it. And then they all sort of descended and were like looking for some like energetic residue of what had just, it was the fucking weirdest thing. They're like with flashlights looking around where I was standing before, you know, it was very bizarre.
Did your breakdancing make a wormhole?
I wasn't breakdancing, but like there's a way that I move when I feel the music in a certain way that is different than all the rest of the dancing. Like all the rest of the dancing, like I'm feeling the music, but I can understand like what I'm doing to generate this motion or this movement. There's something else that happens sometimes that just comes through me for a minute or two, and I can't just like go back and do it again. Like it comes through. And like that, and that's what, and people, you know, it's not like I've experienced it multiple times, but I can't just make it happen on purpose all the time like other dance moves. Like I have to really be in a specific zone. And like whenever it comes through, that's always when people like turn and look and, you know, all that jazz. And then you said something about your skin, like I call it skin suit technology, right? Like that, you know, we each have like a different one. Right. But this is people think of this as just like the house for all the stuff inside of us. But like, no, man, like I can feel that, too. Like any little change in my sort of environment or anything like that. And I definitely sort of feel it in the skin. But I just wanted to hit on those things. And then you were asking me about the lighting. So the party with the hypercube. There was a screen at the front that was having a visual show projected onto it. The visual artist, his name is Octaform. He does really interesting stuff. But what was interesting is a lot of the content of that visual projection were things that I had seen in my mind at the previous party I'd been to in Los Angeles several months earlier. That was like put on by a different group and you know, kind of a different thing. It was weird. It was like somehow what I had seen 6 months before now was like the content of this thing. And so there was a visual show there. And then there was there was a big screen up front. And then there was these slats of screen arranged sort of around the floor this way, like with space in between them. Right. So whole screen up front and then slatted screen experience on the side that was creating this interesting depth effect, right? Where like up front, you're being shown everything you're supposed to see. And then on the sides, there's the implication of this whole scene being there when really only parts of it were being projected, right? So it was kind of, it creates sort of an interesting effect. The party I had been to previously, there was no visual projection on a screen. There was just these hanging lights. Like I forgot, at the time I went and I looked at like what these lights were, and they were these sort of, for lack of, I don't know the technical term, some type of like fluorescent or whatever type of lighting that were hanging from like a rack that was like on the ceiling. They were hanging and they were in different arrangements and like lengths to create the illusion that the room was much bigger than it was, right? Mm-hmm. So the room, like when you would look at the room, like the DJ booth was sort of 2/3 the way back. And then there was a bunch of warehouse behind it. And then the people were up here, right? But like, if you went up close to the DJ booth, you could see the back wall. But when you were in the other end of the room, the way the lighting was arranged, it looked like the room was many football fields long, right? Mm-hmm. And there was all of these sort of colored things hanging. And when I would close my eyes, like those lights were creating like divisions. Like if you close your eyes and you see like a beehive kind of formation, the lights were what was creating like the separate hexagons or whatever it is. Or like if you think of like, did you ever watch what was that show where they all sat in their own cube? Like not the Muppet Show, but like it was one of those dating shows, Love Connection, and or something like that. Or what was that? What it was?
Hollywood Squares.
Hollywood Squares. That was it. Hollywood Squares. Right. It was almost like creating these little rooms that were smaller versions of the whole thing. So like the whole thing looked like one big thing, and then there was a smaller version within each square, but it was like creating an imprint on like the back of your eyelids or in your consciousness, so that you were having this sort of architecture in your internal visual space as well. And then you're having those same little feather orbs that I usually have. I'm seeing them go across your screen tonight. Do you see them?
Yeah, it's because I have all the windows open.
Okay,
and
so they're not that. Okay, I don't. Okay, when I get them,
they're flies and gnats.
Okay, we don't have them here. So when they happen here, it's like, where is that? Yeah, we're not having them in our house because we don't have our windows open. Okay, so anywho, okay, so then they had these weird things on the side that were like LED sort of digital disco balls. Right now, most of the parties I go to have one single old school disco ball hanging in the middle of the ceiling, and not all of them, most of them. At a certain point, I made the observation, this was many years ago, that almost all the good parties always have a disco ball, and when the party's not good, there's also no disco ball. Like, I don't know, right? But this did not have a disco ball in the middle. It had like 4 or 5 small disco balls around the outside of that sort of cage thing that was holding these hanging lights. And at one point, I've never seen anything like this at a party before, right? That one over here stopped working. And in the middle of the dance floor with like hundreds of people, somebody climbed up there with a fucking ladder and repaired the ball in the middle.
That's what makes me think that this was an experiment.
And see, it was very important to them that be working. I've seen, like, the only time I've seen repairs done during a party is if something fucks up with the sound system, or like if the main screen goes off. But if there's like some small light over here and all the rest of the lights are working, they'll generally just leave it unless they can do it without creating. I have never seen this before, where they drag a ladder out into the middle of the dance floor and repair it during the party. And where that one was right behind where I was standing later, when I had that energy come through me and do the move, and then everybody comes, and then some weird plasma thing dropped on the back of my neck, and all during that was this is a different party. Like, there was no screen show, so that you were not being told what to think based on what you were looking at. But in my own mind, and I did a show with Topher and shows with Nish and Danny and a few other people where I talked about this, I was watching how our, quote, DNA is not this like stable thing. It's like some sort of like oscillating, vibratory, like light language that, like, I was looking, when I came back from this experience, I started investigating the glass bead game being about genetic engineering. That was like what I left that party with. This was like over a year ago now, so I'm trying to remember specific details, but it was very exciting to watch the DNA form itself into this like beautiful dancing work of art, and the idea that our biology is somehow related to this this dynamic experience that is not much different than me enjoying dancing at one of these kinds of events was very tittillating to me at the time, right? It was very interesting. And it was almost like watching it do what it was doing was correlated to what I was thinking about and to the music. Like, it would build to a peak, and then a thing would happen, and it would like do all of these sort of like moves and jumps and whatever it was. It was like really fascinating to watch. And I was able to find some graphic images of DNA searching on the internet after that looked a lot like what I saw. It's kind of, I don't even know if DNA is what we think it is, or if it is where they say it is, or if it works how they say it does.
I just have Tom Cowan in the back of my head. He's just like, show me real DNA.
I think it's like the other thing we're not allowed to say doesn't exist, right? Or whatever it is. So this is what I think at this point. Like, I don't think it exists in this way that people have been taught that it exists. I think we have some like material that we're made up of that can do different things. And it can receive like codes can be passed through it that instruct it to do certain things at certain times. But it's kind of like, did you ever watch Inspector Gadget when you were little? This message will right? Yeah. This message will self-destruct in 30 seconds. So the code, like the instructions get sent, and then your genetics or your body, whatever this is we have, I don't even know what the right language is, does its thing, but there's not some substance sitting there left around that is the evidence of that. It's moved on to our biology has moved on to do something else. So when they are conducting genetic tests, they're not finding a substance that is DNA. They're finding evidence that something was there at one time that was a code for something, and that's it, right? It's kind of like it was Walter Russell's material. He talks about how the elements are not substances. The elements are a set of conditions that give rise to the substance.
Exactly.
That's what DNA is. I think DNA is like some sort of weird cymatic, vibrating pattern geometry that instructs something in our biology to do things, and then once the message is received, it does something else. I don't think it's like sitting around waiting to be collected and tell us who we are from Ancestry or 23andMe or something like that. You have like a bird there now. I saw like a yellow canary.
It's not material. It ends up like, like Mike Winter says, it's a resonance signature. I just had the Biggleson brothers on, and they do all the holographic blood analysis, and you can see the pleomorphism of where everything is morphing at a micro level, and it will actually give a light signature within, if somebody's looking at it, to like an ailment in the body, right? But I think this is going on a much, much, much more profound level. Like I literally wonder how solid reality actually is. Like we did this when I lived in the ashram. Like you'll get to the fourth wall. You'll get to this point of where your attention falls all the way back. And then there's this understanding that the only thing that's being experienced by your consciousness is some form of movement, some form of agitation. But if you're not aware of it, and this sounds like it could sound very solipsistic, but like there are things where like if your consciousness isn't giving attention to it, do you know if it even exists? And we're all told this story. Like we're all told this story that, hey, there's all this stuff out there. But at the same time, we're told that this stuff out there actually is mostly empty.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like I'm like, when I say this, I don't mean this that I'm the only one, but I'm fairly certain that I'm the only person that exists in the entire world, and that you are too. And that we're having, right, everything else is just some sort of like weird like projection or observation that we're making it a specific sort of moment that organizes all of the rest of it. And we're kind of, the thing that we call like shared reality or community or whatever is just like this momentary shared delusion that we're having over and over again, that there's other people, sort of out there. I don't mean it in the most solipsistic kind of way, but I understand how it can be perceived that way. But I've had moments, particularly like at parties, like not when I'm like dancing, like getting it like big time dancing, but when I'm just kind of like observing my inner visual space and moving to music a lot, where I completely forget that I'm a person. I lose my body. Like I'm just like melted into like this field of whatever it is that I am thinking about. And like when I have that startled moment of like, oh my God, I forgot, like I'm actually a person here in the body. Like, okay, what do I do next? Right? Like when I read people's accounts of having those type of experiences in meditation or chanting or the different sort of things you do in an ashram or whatever it is, it sounds pretty similar, just like maybe a different set of like specific stimuli. But yeah, I mean, it's like at certain times it wouldn't be really hard to convince me either that I'm the only one that exists or that I don't exist at all.
Right. So let's kind of bounce this experience with some of these shows that you turned me on to. Dark, love it. Anything, because Dark, Stranger Things, these shows actually show that there's a reverse reality. There's like literally a reality, like in Stranger Things, they call it upside down. Mm-hmm. I don't think they give it a name in Dark. I think there is a truth to that, because I think we live on a plane of inertia, right? and we're right side up. There is an up, there is a down, and all this stuff. But there's all this evidence that this plane of inertia, like if you're thinking of it from a hyperdimensional standpoint, it's stacked. There'd be a stacking. And at any point, if there's a resonant pattern from one to the other, it's not going to be 100% the same, but you're going to have, and you can drop from one to the other, to the other, to the other. I think that's a reality. I actually think, I know people like to call it the multi-universe thing, but multi-universe implies, once again, that all of experience, like quote unquote experience, is real. By its very definition, experience is not real because experience is temporal. If it's temporal, it's not actually, it's not permanent. If it's not permanent, it's not eternal, it's temporal. So in that, in the temporary aspect of activity, when somebody says that there's an alternate universe, it's not an alternate universe because you are the axis mundi. There's an alternate you.
Yes.
And because everybody has to admit, everybody has to like really like get to it and go, okay, from my perspective, I can only speak for myself. So even though I might have hundreds of friends and family and all this stuff, you come into this through the portal alone, you go out of the portal alone. And there's something to be said about that. There's something about this thread that you are the axis mundi of your own life. And when we're having these like drops into these other, aspects of being, I mean, it's so elucidating to what the actual nature of this experience is. I don't like to say universe, because in reality, we're just having an experience, or we're having a continuity of experiences that we want to call a lifetime, or we want to call an epic or whatever. So that's why I love exploring these shows and talking to somebody like you about it, because there's so many people out there that are scared to admit that they actually have these types of changes in perception, or these changes in the central hub, or the axis by which they're experiencing these different things.
Yeah. So, okay. So the way you describe it, like I've been talking about this a lot lately too. Like I sometimes describe it as like the different layers of the cake, like, right? Like which layer of the cake are you sort of in, or, and I've also been describing a scenario where there's sort of an endless, whether you think of it as dimensional, right? As like dimensions or layers, or whether you think about it as aspects of yourself, there's almost an endless array of them. Right. And every sort of variation on yourself that you can think of is like the motivating principle of the you that exists in another one of these layers or whatever. But they're all you. And when I was describing so first of all, I think Dark is like probably the best television show I've ever seen. Right. Like when I watched this, and this is exactly like this person created into a television show exactly what I've been trying to explain to people about Chatsworth for the last 8 years, right? And so, or that's about how long I've been doing shows, right? I think this is like, maybe I'm unique in the way I describe my experiences, but I think this is literally either happening or available to be perceived to people all over the world who've grown up in communities where there's a nuclear reactor or a power plant or a Department of Energy facility or a particle accelerator or something where energy fields are being either observed, experimented with, or created, right? That there's this sort of accelerated distortion in like the normal order of things that can start to give rise to your awareness about what we're talking about here. And when I saw this show, I'm like, this person made a perfect television show to encapsulate what I've been trying to say about my experiences and how many of these other phenomena that are part of sort of our conspiratorial reality in the information field we've all, sort of exposed ourselves to, that are connected to this. And I know that it's exactly right because the main male character in the show's name is literally Michael Wan. So I understand that this show is about us, right? And that there's someone else in Germany who grew up in a small town that's very much like Chatsworth, that his medium for talking about this is just creating beautiful cinematic television shows as opposed to, shooting the shit with Christopher Gardner here on a podcast. But we're talking about the same stuff, and the way he shows, and I don't know how far you are into it, but the way he explains the different secret societies and the lodges that are based around different ideas and how they sort of interact, how time and dimension interact with each other and revolve around each other, and who controls which. And I mean, there's so many interesting things, but like literally almost every phenomena that we experience as part of the information streams that we observe here, like get a treatment in this show. And there's a few other really good television shows that I think do it from another perspective, if that sort of aesthetic is not for you or whatever it is. But what I think, I think the more that I pay attention to a lot of this, like I liked the way that you sort of were talking about time or the temporal aspect of things. Like I think there's more conversation, whether it be in like television shows or in the way that like scientism is presented to us about time travel than there is about sort of dimensional movement, right? Or these sort of fractal aspects and falling into them, like slip, like kind of thing. And I think that's intentional, right?
Yes.
I think that they want, because time implies that we live in something linear.
It's linear, yeah.
As opposed to
absolutely
something omnidirectional and like, right, and kind of thing. And the more I really think about it, that like, what if, and I'm not saying that this is how it is, but it's a way to think about it. What we have thought about as years were really frequency levels. And the reason, and so when you experience a dimensional movement to a place that looks like what we've been told was what things looked like back in 1742, you think you've traveled back in time rather than you've just resonated with the frequency band where that's sort of what's going on there, right? Because you will hear people like at the same party, not the hypercube party, but the DNA party. Let's call them the hypercube party and the DNA party. I was talking to these girls outside, and this girl was telling me about, she used to live in this one house in Woodland Hills, which is really close to where I grew up. And that she had like, she didn't know what it was. There was like another family living in her living room, right? But when she would see them, they all always looked like they were dressed in, like the living room looked like it was from the 70s, right? And so like, it wouldn't make sense that she's time traveling, like, she's just standing there and like out of the corner of her eye, she sees like the other people in the living room, and the living room looks more like it's in the 70s, and then it goes away. Like in my head, she just like resonated at a different sort of frequency than she normally does. And all of the things that we think of as being either far away in time, future or past, or far away sort of in distance, like space stuff, are really just other angles or dimensions of reality that are right here with us all the time. And if we look at it from that perspective, or if we vibrate at that frequency, then that's the way we experience the same space for that period of time, right?
Definitely.
And so when you talk about sort of like falling into this, like one of the things, and I think this is, like, I've recognized this for myself. And again, I agree with you. I can only speak about, like, people used to complain a lot when I first started with Randy that I talked about myself a lot. And I think there was this idea that I thought that, like, somehow my experiences were better or more important. And that wasn't it at all. It was just like the only thing that I could be certain about was what I experienced. That's the thing that I was an expert on, and we're talking. And so, right, I'm referring to the things that I know. And I encourage everybody to pay attention in their own life, and they can have stories that are maybe way more interesting than mine. And I'm delighted to hear about them, right? But that part of this sort of great work that we're doing, or whatever it is to reach a level of sort of alignment in yourself and in your spirit, that you're okay with whichever version of yourself you end up resonating with at that time. So, you know, when I was at the party that night, I was not put off or disturbed by all of this stuff that was going on around me with seeing different versions of myself, even though some of the versions reminded me of a time in my life that was challenging or painful, or where I wasn't doing well. I didn't feel like I needed to do anything to interfere or to fix it. I just could look at them and go, they'll be fine. You're fine. They'll be fine. They're all you. You're all them. Right. And I enjoyed that experience. And if the truth is that, like, I left into a different reality that I came from, there was a time when if I left and I went home and my bedroom was not the same, I might have been, or that my bedroom wasn't there at all, like, I might have been highly disturbed by this. This would have led to a panic. I would have felt like this was somehow my fault because I was doing drugs or I wasn't being responsible in my life. And it would become, but at the place that I found myself at, it's like, well, they're all me. And I've come to terms with myself. So whichever reality I find myself, we'll roll with that. And, like, later I might find myself at a hypercube party again, and maybe I'll end up back in the other one, and that would be okay too. Right. But the more in alignment we are with ourselves, like, it's all the same person. They're not different people. They're just you sort of vibrating sort of differently. And when you sort of come to terms with the many ways that you can be, then wherever you find yourself is like the spot to rock, you know?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
There was a time when I would not have been okay with that. I would have been like, you know, like Dorothy in fucking Oz being like, you know, follow, you know, where's Auntie M and whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I think with maturity, there's a lot less of a need to control. You know,
Yeah.
when there's an insecurity or an immaturity, there on multiple different levels, there's a real need to, like, try and go to what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I find the more mature mind doesn't mind the mystery, doesn't mind the phase shift, you know, with what a fully lived life actually presents. And I also see, like, one thing I've seen a lot, especially in my study in astrology, is, like, actually seeing that you can see in people's charts, depending on what transits are occurring, that, oh, you got a lot of energy in Ophiuchus, which is like the gateway out of here. Those are probably, like, you know, the times where you're having, it's very easy to enter a portal into, like, a different, you know, aspect of self, right? So I'm always amazed with your journeys because they're so, it seems like what you go through specifically is always a physically induced thing. Like, whether you're jogging by your lake and you notice that the mirroring of the lake is like, it's like a mirror of the
Yep.
buildings and the and there's like, hey, there's a gateway. You're just excellent at actually showing that through physical embodiment, like actually using your body to a high degree, you can kind of open these gateways to these other dimensions or these other phases of reality.
Yeah, I think that our bodies are really important. And, like, I realize that like flies in the face of a lot of information that has been presented in, like, the new age community for certain periods of time, like, or even within this sort of, alternative information or conspiratorial type of realm. Lots of people are anxious to get off of this planet and drop their body, or like, oh, the physical suit doesn't matter. It's your spirit. It's what's inside, and whatever. And like, I understand that, like, on some level, but like our bodies, like we were talking about with our skin, but this is the device that we have. This is the gyroscope that we have to navigate. Like, we are not in like linear space or time. Everything is multidimensional and omnidirectional. And so the cues and the information, the little subtle energies and things like that mean quite a bit, and so do the big ones. But the more effective we can be at understanding the information that our body is taking in, and then the information that it's sort of feeding back out, and how we sort of maneuver ourselves in our environment, the more primed we will be to take advantage of the magic moments that either we manufacture or engineer, or that are presented to us. Like, I sense in my body when something is starting to feel a little different, and then I start paying attention. And that's when I have the experiences that are the ones that I report to you. And then you're like, oh, wow, that's an amazing, whatever it is. I have learned how to pay attention based on the signals that my body is giving me, right? My body gives me the signal, and then I open my mind, and then I'm able to see this extended array of options of what is in front of my face. Like, I see the same stuff you guys all see, but like, I'm able to sort of move a little bit. I'm like, oh, I see, there's like a mirage here. And if I can move just right, I can see it from another angle, and like a whole other bit of space or time opens up for me temporarily, so I can go in and explore, right? And then it's a question of starting to, like, the practice that I've gotten into is starting to look around, and in order to remember it, because we've all had this experience, like you're having an amazing moment on the dance floor, or you're having an amazing trip, and then when you go and try to explain it to people the next day, like, it's hard to bring it back up. But if I start to look around and start to think about, while I'm in the experience, how am I going to tell this story? It's almost like Polaroid snapshots start to line themselves up. And then I'm able to take everything I learned in that extended moment of space or time, and then come back and try and understand what just happened. And then the next time I get an opportunity like that, then I have more information, and I know maybe there's a door over here I can go knock on, and there's a slide down to a secondary space that I hadn't even realized that was there the last time I had one of these experiences. And in there you find some real interesting stuff, right? So I've been sort of actively, I just had one of those things, actively, but in my house, there's no open doors or flies or gnats. So, like, I can really start to actively and hopefully accurately, like, navigate hyperspace, the hyperspace that I am generating around myself with the way that my insides resonate with the outsides, right? I think everybody has like a different sort of field that they generate. And so I don't think it's a case of like, I can tell you to go to this coordinate on the map at this time, and you'll have the experience I had. You might have an experience there, but it was going to be different than the one that I have, because wherever there's a soft spot, there's like an opportunity for like a self-generated universe or a self-generated sort of environment, right? So yeah. So what I wanted. Okay. Go ahead.
I want to finish up, because we started the whole thing talking about this incredible experiment that you were in.
Right.
And I want to frame it in a way where I really think it was an experiment. I can't say 100%, but the fact that the gentleman went and changed the lighting when it went bad, that tells me, that tells me that there were multiple points of view that were actually making sure that the control was on, right? And so that's going on. And you leave, like, you have your experience within it, and then you made the statement, and you didn't elaborate, that since going out of that, you phase shifted, like you're in a different actual cut. How do you know that? Like what has been the experience that you're actually having that would make you believe that?
So two things. So the thing with the light being changed was actually a previous party, but I think that I'm going through constant different iterations of it. The thing that I would say about that party and the group of people that were throwing it and what I know about various things correlated to that was that feels to me like more like that is an experiment. Like somebody wants this particular thing to happen because they want to observe something, and the party becomes the excuse for that. The second party, which is where the hypercube scenario was, my feeling about that environment, that group of people and the things that were going on is that these are the children whose parents worked in these projects and they have learned about how to work the toys and they're just getting together and having fun. And there's not some like some overlord observing it, trying to make a specific, someone might be observing, but it's more like, if your dad worked at Sandia Laboratory and you had like, you knew how to build like a small cold fusion device and you know, or whatever, and you were showing me how it worked and we played with it in the garage, that is like different than you being taken into Sandia Lab and observed as they're trying to make you do something or whatever, right? Like they're just the energy around it is different. But as for what you said about the shift, so a couple of things, like in the few days after it happened, like some things that I brought up, like Laura didn't remember those things happening, right? It wasn't like enough of a difference that I'm like, who's this person and what have you done with my Laura? Like small things about like some conversation we had.
Laura's black now.
There was a few things that there was a few things that were like that. But mostly, like the thought had started to occur to me while I was in the hypercube in the party that this could be a possibility. And I had already come to terms with the fact that like, whatever it is, it'll be cool. I'll have an interesting story about it for, you know, whatever it is. So it was there is a piece about myself that something feels more settled. And it could just be that I had that experience and I was okay with it. Or it could be that I'm just resonating with a different Emily. It's been easier for me to speak about my feelings, even at the risk of offending or upsetting somebody else, and then also be okay with whatever the consequence of that is, which is something that was not true sort of for me before. Things about my body are a little bit different, like in terms of tolerance of specific foods. Right. Information my body is feeding back to me as to possibly how to resolve certain issues that like didn't occur to me forever and ever, even though it seems kind of obvious. And suddenly it like becomes the clear, like just minor things. It's not like some crazy, it's not, you know, you hear about these like Mandela effects where like somebody had a child in one reality and in this one they don't. And they're like, where the fuck is their child or whatever? It's not like that. It's been small, but they were like immediate. And it was like Laura agreed with me about this. And you, even when we did our show, you were like, there's an energy about you that feels different. So I don't know.
Yeah, you kept shifting. Like you literally, like when I had to look down, because I didn't know if I was tripping balls or whatever, because I wasn't drugged. I had just worked all day and I was kind of in that working high. And then when we started it, I was like, are my eyes just tired? Because you kept doing like this, like blip in, blip in, blip in. So whenever that happens to me, especially like with my clients, I'll just look at something that's not living and focus on something that's like, you know, not emanating an energy force, and then look back at them and like use a baseline. And man, you were like dink, 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 dink.
So that what you describe about me is something that people have always noticed about me. Like when I'm dancing at parties, like people, oh, did you see that one? There's nothing, it's right here in front of me, but there's nothing, it's not really in the room. Like it's like energetic or plasma or something. There's no thing that was on me, right? This has been happening. Did you see the light flash?
Yeah.
That was weird too. Okay. So it's interesting that like when they come and what I'm talking about when they come, somebody sent me like Mercer, Steve Mercer. I think you know Steve Mercer, don't you? Do you know
I
Steve
don't
Mercer?
know. How would I know?
Freeman's producer. He's Freeman's producer, and he's
Yes,
chatting
yes.
with everybody. He sent me a video of like a Hare Krishna guy, like chanting Hare Krishna, and like when he was doing like the most intense stuff, like they were all around him, like it was like it was like orbs or something, right? But they looked just like the feathers. It was very weird. Anywho, okay, so what people have always told me about that when they watch me dancing from like across the room, I blip in and out. Or this has even been observed like in an outdoor dancing setting. Someone has told me that. And one of the weird experiences I have been to thousands of parties. There are very few pictures from parties that exist of me. And I can go through like somebody takes like some parties that I go to, there's like a photographer there, and later they'll like post the pictures like from the party on a website somewhere, right? And I can go through the whole night and I know where I was standing and that there's pictures of the people that were standing all around me, but you can't see, there's no pictures of me. Like I'm not, even though I know I was standing there the whole night and I remember when that moment happened that the photograph was, I'm not in the picture, right? So I don't know if that is something that has always been present for me in that environment, and what happened for me that night is I carried it home with me, right? Like that thing. Like maybe what I'm experiencing now is like just this ability to like relax and adjust into whichever version of myself or reality like that matches me at that moment. That could be possible because I'm finding it like even in my difficult moments, and like Laura can attest to this, like I've taken some risks and talked about challenging things at challenging moments that maybe I wouldn't have done before. And like it becomes okay in a way that like used to lead to like a lot of chaos and confusion or arguing or difficult, right? It's almost like I'm able to collapse the versions sometimes, not always. This is not a perfected science, but like I'm able to collapse certain versions and like move into the not necessarily always the one that I desire, but the one that is like the best one for my next progress or my next,
right,
moving forward in life or something like that. And there's a comfort with that since that evening that I did not have before that. I have less anxiety about things that used to really bother me than I did before.
That's great. I'll take that. Yeah, when you reached out to me, it was really crazy because I was going through an Alison McDowell like deep, study of like pretty much all of her I wouldn't say first early work. I would say work that started about 3 years ago. And she had been getting into all these emerging markets that are going to be created with, Internet 4.0, with all of the technology that's in essentially all the surveillance technology that's in all of the tech that we all use. And it's all based around making our body, all of the biomarkers in our body, essentially the collateral for new securities. So they're trying to take like the sign of nature out of us, where when we sign something now, that's a mark of will. That's like our willpower is involved. That's our creator, a funnel for our creator. And what they're shifting it is the sign of nature is going to be your biology, right? So here you are telling me that you're in this experimental thing and you've gone through a couple of these things now where like maybe it is just these kids of these like, entertainment moguls that are playing with you, but either way, the data sets that they would gather is such that we know that our Terra is being reformed and there's a commodities market. And the people at the highest ends of the commodities markets, they're like, sell orange juice today, like in trading places. Like they know what the weather is going to be because they order the weather that they want. It's going to be the same thing with our bodies, especially if we're exposed to technology like you were. Like I know when I'm dealing with like my parents, like if they're watching TV 6 hours a day, I know that I'm not actually dealing with them. I'm dealing with a program that they're running. they've been entrained, right? So what I can foresee happening, and I want to ask you where you're at with this, is like, do you think like with this type of technology, whether it's a frequency technology with all the different cell phone towers, whether it's ELF waves that none of us can hear audibly, but they definitely do affect us. Like my wife, it's unbelievable. In Costa Rica, she would get ill before every earthquake, which was like every day there. It's because, you know, earthquakes emit ELF waves. Like it's just one of these things where we've been so stupefied to believe that we're a material organism that not that many things affect other than like some sort of particle or chemical, where I think it's the exact opposite. We're an immaterial being that's essentially a conglomeration of vibrations. So vibrations are the only thing that really affect us. And I think that technology is going to be foisted upon us for these new markets of debt. Like I mean that it's very obvious. Like in the big pushers of these markets are going to use this type of thing in for their advantage.
Okay, so my position on this is very nuanced, right? So I think that like that's a version of reality that will come to fruition, but it's not the only version of reality that is going to come to fruition. I feel like a couple of things that like the inversion is really like I think humans, whatever this is, whatever this physical body is that's just vibrating non-material or something, right? Like frequency, it's super high technology, and everything that they create mimics our bodies or the natural environment, right? And so this like mind control that we've been under, that like, oh, the computers are far superior to us, and well, why are they all like mimicry of us then, right? Like if there's something
Exactly.
different that's better. So I think that like that version of reality, there's going to be people out there that are creating that, and those people are like probably like I don't know if they're necessary to the system, or a system just allows it because it keeps people who like whose mind, you know, keeps people sort of busy pursuing that angle of things long enough that people who are pursuing like other advancement can get far enough out ahead that or whatever it is, or it keeps people who aren't like deeply doing the work from the super high knowledge, like the people who just want to sort of either outsource thinking about everything can get caught up in that, or people who want to blame everything on everyone else on some level can get caught up in that. But I think there's a very organic version. I think that we live in this sort of intelligent plasma reality that is constantly exchanging, that's an organic thing, that's exchanging information with our consciousness constantly. And there's all these sort of interactions that are happening. Then there's a completely synthetic version of that. And then there's a place where there's like some crossover. The crossover is like where the most chaos is going to be. There's going to be people who are happy to just sell themselves into the Borg. And then there's people who are going to be like on some level completely or all levels sort of like off-roading it. But this is what I have to say is that whoever they are and whatever the it is crowdsourcing solutions to problems they don't know the answer to yet to us. And while that idea that all these physical and biological movements are creating markets and it's creating a digital totalitarian reality, like you can do that with that, and they might, right? But really, there's people out there, and maybe it's a few people, or maybe it's all of us, it's just people aren't aware of their own intelligence and their own brilliance, that are like, you're different than me. You have different quote unquote biology, you vibrate at a different frequency, though I suspect that there's probably quite a bit of sympathetic resonance between us and whatever it is. If you go to the party and you go in the hypercube with me, whether it's a naturally created hypercube, a false one, some combination in between, ill-intended, well-intended, or whatever, your set of observations are going to be different than mine. And they want to know about that, right? Mm. So the way I've come to see things is there's like nothing that I want to learn or know or experience that I'm not allowed to, right? I just have to think about things differently. Like we get into this thing where it's like someone's telling me I can't do something, so that's exactly what I want to do, instead of sort of being creative about the way we sort of go about things. And when I pursue things not being directed towards what I'm told I'm not allowed to do, but just pursuing my interests, I find this never-ending field of things opens up. And that when I pursue that information, the high knowledge that is powerful comes to me at the pace that I can understand it and responsibly wield that knowledge. And when a person busts into a layer of information because they steal documents or because they are spying on someone that they're not yet responsible enough to wield, that's when you get these disastrous, tyrannical ideas about things and whatnot. But the fact that that exists in the world is almost like this sort of weird natural, like, controlling system. Like I was trying to explain this to someone the other day, right? Like at the moment I discover something, that's the exact moment I'm mature enough to handle it. And that there's all of this, like when we see all of this crazy, whatever tyrannical shit happening, those people got to the information before they were ready for it. And they're doing immature things with it. And the recognition that that is sort of what this is part of the lesson of discernment that is sort of necessary for us to go through, so that then when we progress to a level where we have discovered information or found out things about ourselves or the nature of reality or whatever that could also be very powerful, we have an understanding of what is right to do with it. And I don't think we're being kept from knowledge. I just think they're not making it easy for us. And I don't know if I have a problem with that anymore. Like there was a time when I was like, tell me everything and tell me now. And that was also the same time when I was like high on drugs in my apartment, not taking care of myself, like being dishonest with people about, what I was doing and all kinds of things. And like now I feel like every day I discover the exact amount of information that I can responsibly process and integrate into some understanding of the world that I can deal with. And that, like, it seems to be like, like that there's like, there used to be some TV show I watched when I was little where like you hop to a different on the tile on the floor and then the next one lit up and then the next one lit up and whatever. It's kind of like this sort of self-guiding thing. Like I think that the system, whatever the system is, and when I say system, I don't mean the tyrannical fake system. I mean nature, right? Like it wants us to progress at the pace that we are able to deal with it at. And I don't think that when I go to that party, I don't think something is being done to me. I think that I'm knowingly I think there's people in there that don't understand what's happening, right? That they're going to the party and they think it's just like music and fun and drugs, and they don't understand about what's going on. But I'm a conscious participant, and it's a learning experience for me. And I recognize that there likely are people observing or collecting information or experimenting with things, but I'm also learning, and that's going into sort of my compendium of knowledge. And I would rather take the risk and know than just like stay home because I don't want to engage in any of that and not have the experience that can sort of expand the field of what I want to look into next.
I might have missaid what I was trying to say. I hope I didn't come off as a Debbie Downer.
No, not at all.
What I was trying to point out is essentially at the very highest end of the people that make, debt and make credit on this planet, they know we are a vibrational entity.
Yeah. You can definitely do that. So what you're saying is, yes, that can definitely be done. That it is definitely is being done and will be done. But that doesn't mean, I don't know that that's going to be like the fully dominant thing. right? And I
Oh,
feel
no.
right, but I feel like, sure, yes, there's someone who's figured out that like you can capture the energy generated on the dance floor, and like not only can you like power an entire city with it, because that's like a, you know, it's like a high output of energy, but like probably you can also sniff it and get high off of it or something, and people are doing all kinds of, and then you can package it and sell it as collateral on the whatever. I'm sure that there's all kinds of that kind of stuff going on. But just because that can be done doesn't mean that just because it's happening doesn't mean it's the point, right? And all of that, like, I just encourage people that not to take the awareness that that is a reality, because that is a reality. It is a reality. It's not the reality. But for me, like, I don't let that stop me from doing the things that I want to do, because I inherently feel that whatever the fuck that is, like, those people are more dependent on me than I am on them, even though they would like us to believe that, like, you know, we must beg for our next meal and workout, our next meal and wardrobe or whatever from them, right? So, but yes, you can do that. There's no energy that's not being stored.
Right. And so I think the big thing that I was, because I look at I'm a synchro-mystic like you.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to Alison McDowell for like a week straight, and then I get the message from you, hey, this, and this happened to me. And then you're telling me this experience. And I have, a fair bit of knowledge when it comes to geoengineering. And I'm like I'm like, oh, this is just the micro level of geoengineering. This is Emily engineering that's going on.
Yeah, like,
And
I think
it was all, I'm just being the synchro-mystic here, is like, there's no coincidence that I'm learning Alison McDowell's whole like hierarchy of how the implementation of like all these different technologies that are vibrationally based are going to be used to commoditize the human's biomarkers.
Yes.
And then you give me a very specific thing where it's like, my biomarkers were being completely engineered in an engineered environment. And I was just like, oh, 2 and 2 is 4 here. It's like, it was like, so boom, boom. For me, that was like, whenever that happens, I pay a lot of attention to it.
Have you ever heard when she talks about Oliver Reiser and the world sensorium? And there's another book that he wrote that she talked about having like read or looked at the notes from when she was at like one of the schools in Pittsburgh, when she went and checked out their library. Do you know who Oliver Reiser is?
I do not.
Okay, so he has a book called The World Sensorium, and there's like one other book where she was talking about it. It's called like Cosmic Man or something or whatever. But like, I looked up, I haven't read the book. I would like to read the book. I should read the book. But like, I looked at some of the notes about it, and the way he is describing who he thinks he is in what he thinks he is in mark exactly the sense I have of myself and my environment when I'm in those moments, right? That there's this sort of field of information outside of myself, and I am some sort of like divining rod or pendulum that is sort of like noticing or spotting or picking the epiphanies, the way like a dowser finds the water spot. And like, when I sort of tap into that loaded piece of the atmosphere around myself, then like the information that is sort of stored there unpacks itself for me, right? And his work is definitely been some of the stuff that a lot of the technology has been sort of modeled about, right? But I think what he's describing is like a very like natural spiritual technology phenomenon. And so there's always that layer. There's the natural spiritual technology, right? And then there's this created thing that people make to see, like, so that they can have like a guaranteed replication of the experience, oftentimes because they can't do that thing themselves, right? So like, I love just leaning into that, you know, that we can engineer these experiences, right? Like it's just like the mindset, like of, you know, I'm going to this experience and I'm a dynamic participant from it, and the experience is mine and I can take from it what I will. And if people are watching it and observing and getting something from it as well, then I have an intention with that, and hopefully they'll respect that. And if they're not, then someone had a comment down here about the depth of your knowledge is the depth of your responsibility, right? Like then they're responsible for the way that they sort of wield that knowledge. And that has brought me comfort, because I used to get concerned about all of that kind of stuff. Like, oh, I'm having these experiences. But like, you know, there was times when I was very sure, and I can't say that I'm not still, that there's something that are observing my innermost thoughts, and that like I can't have a moment of on the dance floor that isn't being surveilled by something that is either existing inside of myself or outside of myself. And that used to create those situations where when I would have these unusual experiences, like seeing other versions of myself, I felt a paranoia about it. Like I literally like, and I don't know that this isn't true. Like I'm not dismissing this reality. But for the first place it went is like, oh, the party is on top of a cloning center, and they've sent another version of Emily up to fuck with me. Like, I used to think that they would send the other versions of Emily up to dance behind me to like learn how to do my moves so they could be convincing as the real Emily. Because I can't tell you how many times I'd bump into someone at the party and they'd be like, I saw you at a party last week and you didn't say hi. And I'm like, not only was I not at that party, I was like on the other side of the country, but they were very convinced that they had seen someone that was me. So that was the first place my mind sort of went. And like, now it's like, awesome. There are other versions of me. Like, this is entertaining. Let's play with that too. And what can my consciousness do with that awareness? Right. So, but the level of information and research that you're talking about that she's opened up is stuff that, you know, my consciousness is considered for a long time, enjoys discussing with her and other people in sort of the appropriate venues, and also understand that like whatever about that feels surveillant or dominant is based on something that is like amazing and knowable, right? And so at this point I find it more interesting and inspirational than I do concerning and terrifying.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It was very interesting for me. When my wife had just gotten pregnant, we had come back to Florida. We told the family and everything like that. And I had walked to a local coffee joint, and I was coming back to her parents' place. It was only like probably 6 blocks away. It wasn't that far away. And I felt like I was starting to have a heart attack. And I was just like, oh my God, I got really scared, you know, because I was like, I have a pregnant wife, you know, all these things. And by the time I got back to the house, the symptoms had started to die down, but I had like this extreme anxiety. The whole left side of my body tightened up, and I was just like, whoa. And I was able to get behind my heartbeat. And I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't want to freak anybody out. Well, the next day, I went to the same coffee place at the same time. I was coming back at the same time, and it happened again at exactly the same time. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't me. I'm actually reacting to something." So then my spidey sense went up, and I started to look around, and I started to notice all these like cylinders that were on top of all the light posts. And so as soon as I got back to her parents' place, I went on to Google, and I just looked up 5G testing Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and immediately AT&T was like, we're testing our 5G network in Broward County, blah 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 blah. And I was like, my body was having a reaction directly to that frequency range, and it was so obvious, like what it did to my system. And it wasn't just a few months later after that supposedly the corona, you know, hit.
Right.
And And to me, I was like, oh man, frequency warfare is a thing and all that stuff. But I've been on the positive side of it. I mean, I've been in like shamanic circles. I've been in,
Right.
uh, I've done it all. So like being in all, like I've seen both the positive and the negative sides of it. I have zero doubt that we are very subtle, a subtle conduit to the eternal that is having a somewhat physical experience.
So so back years ago, I used to have, like, when I would drive to work, like there was this one area I would drive through that when I drove through it, it made me feel like I was back on drugs again. Right. Like it was the same
Mhm.
place, like that I would pass this sort of exit on the freeway and I'd feel that for a little bit. And it happened in the exact same place every single time. Right. So like I know that sort of feeling that you're kind of talking about. Have you So after we did the show, the show that I just put out this past week, where that was back in November, it was back in December that we did it. Like that same week, I was doing, I think, sodium as the element for my elementary school glass bead game series with Chris Miner, and I was looking into some interesting things about sodium. I had like one set of windows open, right? And then I had another set of windows open that were correlated to some ideas that you and I had tossed around. And remember, I was showing you that hypercube device that you actually used like another expression of for the thumbnail for tonight's show, right?
Mhm.
And I was explaining that to you, and you were like, oh, like that's dangerous. Well, like right after the show, I was looking at something and I found this device that the Walter Russell Foundation had created that was exactly the same thing, but it was closed off on the outside and you had to look inside this little corner that was open to see the hypercube on the inside. And I was like, oh, I see. This would be the safe way to observe these endless sort of layers or aspects or dimensions, because they're not projecting out all over everywhere where some people don't know what's going on, like what we were talking about. Like a person who is looking in there is looking to see this, and so they understand what they're looking at. And while I was looking at that, it was weird. I sort of ended up in this like combined search path for something related to salt and something related to, I can't remember the name of the term that Walter Russell had for that field that was generated, but I ended up on a Reddit post that was talking about shielding, right, to protect yourself from all of the frequency soup that we live in, right? And obviously there's things people do to shield themselves, like you can put specific paint on walls, you can wear certain fabrics, you can do all this kind of stuff. But there was something in there that was talking about the kind of salt that you consume, and I'm really into the eating specific salts for specific effects, but that this also was part of shielding from some of these frequencies on the inside, and that people who are experiencing increased levels of what one would call reality shifting or Mandela effects are people who are actually shielding themselves or have natural practices that protect themselves from these frequencies. And the people who think that the world is normal are actually the ones who are being bombarded by these frequencies. So the truth is that we live in this very shifting reality where nothing is static, right? And that all of these frequencies that we think of as interrupting are actually creating the illusion that reality is static. And so people who have taken to take care of their health are also the ones who are like, people think they're crazy because they're reporting like the reality changing right in front of their face. And the people who are unhealthy, consuming the bad diet, doing all the bad practices or whatever, they think they're normal. But it was from looking into this, like this combined set of windows I was looking at based on sodium and that hypercube thing we were talking about in relationship to Walter Russell. Like I did some searches after. But I have to, there's a certain terminology related with his work that I can't think of the name of right now. I will look and I will tell you. But since we were talking about the reality shifting and the Mandela effects or whatever before, right? And then we got into this with these engineered environments. It's the those people who just want the world to be, quote, normal again, right? I think that they want us to think that the world is normal. This ever shifting, ever altering holodeck of reality is actually the natural way of things and not vice versa.
I would agree with you. I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. Because all the healthiest people I know, they all have multi-dimensional experiences.
Yep. Yeah.
Without fail. And I will say all the unhealthiest people I know, especially the people that are running like a really hard addiction, specifically the addiction to alcohol, they're the ones that are the most resolute that things aren't changing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy a cocktail here and there, and I obviously am not a part of that sort. I mean, I like cocktails. I make fancy cocktails, but I agree with you. People who like have their daily beer routine, or they're like at the watering hole 60 drinks deep every night of the week or whatever, they're also the ones who insist that reality is completely stable and stagnant and nothing has any meaning, and all of that kind of, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, Emily, we're coming up on 2 hours. I'm gonna bow us out for this Sunday evening. Where can people find your work? What are you up to? Like, what's getting you so excited these days?
Well, there's like, I mean, I'm definitely this what we've been talking about tonight in terms of like opportunity for hyperdimensional experiences and observing other realities and exploring them always has my attention, and the awareness that a lot of this has to do with power and genetics. And when I say that, I don't mean like necessarily like genetics in the way we've thought of it, but that there's this weird connection between what we are and this sort of like nuclear mystery that we're being inducted to. Like, I'm into this sort of exploring nuclear mysticism and whatever, that our sort of evolution, and I don't mean Darwinian, is this relationship between human and their radiant environment, and the way that evolves and changes. Like, some people really thrive in this sort of nuclear environment, but it changes their consciousness and their biology, and it leads them to experiment with and do things that create a new scenario that seems scary and dangerous, but the effects of that cause people to have these thoughts and that thoughts, that it's like an endless sort of thing. So I've really been looking a lot into an esoteric look at the periodic table of elements, nuclear fusion, nuclear fission, particle acceleration, genetic engineering, all of these kinds of things, with no commitment to any version of them that is true or not, just trying to understand all the ideas around that.
Emily, did you know this about me? My grandfather was a nuclear physicist.
I think you did tell me that.
And guess what his last study was for the military?
What was it?
He was a eugenicist for the Air Force.
Of course. See, there is a connection. Like, this is what I think. Like, I think each person, each biology has a different reaction when you expose them to a radiant field, right? And the addition of things and the subtraction of things is fascinating to some of these physicists, and that eugenics isn't always about like the Planned Parenthooding of things or whatever it is, right? It's about finding out what happens when you mix someone's internal energy field with this external sort of energy field, and what is the reaction, right? And nuclear physicists are obsessed with that, and currently so am I. So I like to talk about all of that stuff and psychedelic experiences and weird things that happen to me every day when I'm observing the environment around me. My YouTube channel is my name, Emily Moyer. I don't put out a ton of public material these days. I do a weekly live stream with Danny called Word Salad on Wednesday nights. That's always public. Occasionally I'll do a public show or live stream. I'm actually going to be doing a live stream on my channel with Robert Phoenix tomorrow night. So that will be at 6 p.m. Central. He said to say hello to you. He and I used to do a regular show together called Matrix Mash. We haven't done a show in a really long time, so I'm excited to sort of hop back in the seat with him. So we'll be live streaming tomorrow night. I have an endless, like literally self-generating amount of self-replicating amount of content available to supporters that I sometimes put out publicly in secret places here and there. My Patreon is patreon.com/author Off Planet Media. I have emilymoyer.locals.com and rockfin.com/Emily Moyer.
Jeez.
And ongoing projects with Michael Wan, Danny Katz, Les Luthor, Jeff Gates, all kinds. I like to work with other people. I like to chat. I like to play verbal tennis. I'm not good at the game of tennis. I like to observe that, but I like to do the verbal tennis. And I always enjoy the time I get to spend with you. Looks like we're going to get to meet each other this summer, so I'm looking forward to that. And I always look forward to these conversations, so I hope there's many more. I appreciate you. I love you. Thanks everyone for hanging out.
Oh man, you get much love in these parts. So Emily, I look forward to our next chat. I know I'll be bugging you really early in the morning, as I usually do.
I love it.
Yeah.
Laura's disappointed when we wake up in the morning and there isn't a voice message from you. She looks forward, right? Because I'll look at them and she'll be like, "Did Christopher text?" Right? And
Wait a minute. Is that black Laura or white Laura? It's white. Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
So yes, I love the early morning chatters. That's my best time too. So
Awesome. Well, you guys have a good night, and thanks everybody for joining us in the chat.
Thank you, Mike. That's lovely. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.